In today's video, we're going to talk about what's the difference between a Chrysler Viper versus a Dodge Viper. Have you ever wondered why the Europeans really hated the Dodge Viper? Think about it. Was it just because it was called Chrysler? That didn't make them hate the Viper. So what was it that really made them hate it? Well, let's dive into it. A lot of times people are going to think that there is no true difference between a Chrysler Viper and a Dodge Viper. You know, I went through so many threads and so many of these people that don't know was making idiotic comments saying, well, guess what? It is the exact same horsepower. Oh, well, the Europeans measure horsepower differently. All the different things. But guys, for a Gen 1 and Gen 2, there was a difference between a European Spec Viper versus a Dodge Viper. So let's go ahead and talk about it. The Gen 1 had 364 horsepower. That was the European Spec Viper. Now the US Spec Viper had 400 horsepower. Already we're seeing just over 36 horsepower difference. Now the reality is a lot of people said it felt much slower than that. It wasn't just like, seems like 36 horsepower difference. They said it felt very sluggish. Let's talk about the Gen 2. The Gen 2 also had the same issues. The Gen 2 Euro Spec had 383 horsepower, while the United States had 490 horsepower and 500 foot-pounds of torque. I know a lot of people are going to already stop me right here. Steve, the Viper only had 450 horsepower, 490 foot-pounds of torque. If you ever had gone to the plant where the Viper was built when we were allowed to go there, you would have seen that they underestimated the Viper. I've done so many videos on this in the past, and I have a recent one that you can go back and look at and see exactly what I'm talking about. The Viper truly had 490 horsepower and 500 foot-pounds of torque. So with that being said, the Euro Spec had over 100 horsepower less than the Dodge Viper. But why? What was the difference? Was it the two sets of O2 sensors that the European Spec Vipers came with? Not really. I mean, it's kind of odd that they have that emission type, but I don't think the two sets of O2 sensors is going to make the difference. Do I think it's because it's a Chrysler and not a Dodge? No, that wouldn't have been it either. The name on a car doesn't slow it down. But what does slow it down is government regulations. And the European regulations was so strict that the Viper had to basically be restricted and choked to death. So that's why so many people hated the Viper. They bought this car because they expected it to be fast, they expected it to be amazing, and it was slow. Did you ever see these videos on YouTube where you see a Dodge Viper racing against the Ferrari F40 and the F40 is just walking it? That was because it was a Euro Spec Viper. Had you ever seen the videos where there was the Porsches and the NSX, the Supras, and I forget the other Ferraris that they had. They had an F40 and then I think a 495 or whatever it was, racing with the Dodge Viper. And it started in first place and it ended almost dead last because of a European Spec Viper. So let's go ahead and dive into that a little bit more right now. First of all, let's talk about the 45mm restriction in the exhaust. Yes, that's what they had in there to actually give it less sound. There's a noise ordinance over there, so there's also a pollution ordinance over there that the Viper couldn't make certain noises. So therefore, they had to quiet it down quite a bit. The airbox was also restricted by 40%. So imagine the exhaust is being restricted, the airbox is being restricted, you're not getting the airflow that creates horsepower, you're not going to have a super fast car. What also destroyed the European Spec Vipers were the ECUs. They were a different software and therefore the ignition was significantly retarded. So you could not make the power in Europe that they made in the United States. Now, a lot of this stuff was easy for them to work on and easy for them to redo. The exhaust was also different. over in the Europe specs versus the US spec, the Viper was being choked. It was basically not the same car that it is here in America. There's no conspiracy theories, there's nothing here. This is a well-documented case within the Viper community, but really the people that know this is the people that live in Europe and the old timers, the ones that's owned the Viper for a long time, when the Gen 1 and Gen 2 was such a car that was so desirable in the early 2000s, in the mid 2000s, where people in Europe was trying to buy these vehicles and they wanted to know why was their horsepower numbers so low, why was the performance seem that it wasn't so great, why were they stuck in the mid to high 12s in a quarter mile while the Americans were able to get the Gen 1 and Gen 2 into the very high 11-second range from the stock form. They just couldn't understand why. But for those people that do have a Euro spec Viper, most of these changes are very, very simple. A lot of people have done cat deletes. A lot of people have changed the exhaust, you know, whether it's Borla, Corsa, Bellinger. They did the airbox. They made that improvement. The biggest issue that they still have is the ECU. So the ECU has to be changed if you really want to get the most power out of your Chrysler Viper. But most of the changes will help you significantly. It may not be exactly to the US spec, but it's going to be closer than what you are now. I feel bad for them, but it's government regulations, and guys, you know, that's truly what the difference is between a Chrysler Viper versus a Dodge Viper. Guys, thanks for watching this video as always. God bless and take care.